Sometimes the line between life and death hangs by the thinnest thread. For John Miller, that thread turned out to be the most unlikely guardian angel anyone could imagine, a massive grizzly bear. This is the true story of how a simple walking trail became a desperate fight for survival in the unforgiving wilderness of Montana's Glacier National Park, and how nature's most feared predator became an impossible savior. Before we dive into this incredible story that will change everything you thought you knew about wild animals, take a moment to join our growing family of wilderness enthusiasts. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell right now. Don't miss out on more mind-blowing survival stories that push the boundaries of what we think is possible in nature. This channel is your gateway to the most extraordinary true stories from the wild. The morning had started like any other Sunday in early October. John Miller, a 32-year-old office worker from Minneapolis, had always dreamed of experiencing the raw beauty of America's national parks. He had seen countless photos of Glacier National Park's stunning landscapes on social media. The crystal-clear lakes reflecting snow-capped mountains, the endless carpets of wildflowers, and the promise of spotting wild animals from a safe distance had drawn him to book a weekend getaway at one of the park's lodges. What John didn't know as he parked his rental car at the Logan Pass Visitor Center was that his casual 2-hour hike would spiral into a desperate 72-hour ordeal. He didn't know that he would soon face freezing temperatures without proper gear, or that his choices in the next few hours would leave him trapped in one of the most remote sectors of the park. Most importantly, he had no way of knowing that his salvation would come in the form of the very creature most hikers spend their lives trying to avoid. That crisp autumn morning, John stepped out of his car wearing only jeans, a light jacket, and comfortable sneakers. The only items in his small drawstring backpack were a bottle of water, his phone, and a granola bar. For the simple hiking trail he had planned to take, this would have been enough. But John Miller was about to make a series of decisions that would test the very limits of human survival and challenge everything we think we know about the relationship between humans and wild animals. The visitor center was unusually quiet that morning. The summer crowds had long since departed, and the approaching winter kept most casual hikers away. John barely glanced at the warning signs posted at the trailhead. The bright yellow notices cautioned about sudden weather changes, the importance of proper gear, and the presence of wildlife. In his mind, this was just a simple day hike. The first hour on the hidden lake trail was everything John had hoped for. The autumn colors painted the landscape in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Mountain goats grazed peacefully in the distance, and the clear morning air carried the sweet scent of pine needles. The trail was well marked, and John felt confident in his ability to navigate it. Then came the first mistake. A small deer path branching off from the main trail caught his attention. It seemed to lead toward a better viewpoint, one that would make for perfect photos to share with his friends back home. The path looked well worn, and John convinced himself he could easily find his way back to the main trail. He took out his phone to mark his location, but the battery, drained by the cold temperature and constant photo-taking, displayed a mere 15% charge. John's second mistake was ignoring the darkening sky above the mountain peaks. October weather in Glacier National Park was notoriously unpredictable, but he pressed on, enchanted by the increasingly spectacular views. The deer path grew fainter, but ahead lay a promising clearing that seemed to offer an even better vantage point. Time slipped away as John wandered further from the marked trail. The temperature began to drop as clouds gathered overhead. The first snowflakes started falling, just as John realized he had lost all sense of direction in the dense forest. His phone battery died moments after he tried to check his location, leaving him without any means of navigation or communication. Panic set in as the snow began falling harder, quickly coating the ground and obscuring any traces of the path he had followed. The light jacket that had been comfortable in the morning now proved woefully inadequate against the dropping temperature. John's sneakers, perfect for a casual hike, offered little protection as the snow soaked through them as the sun began to set. The reality of his situation became frighteningly clear. John Miller, an inexperienced hiker with no survival training, was lost in one of the most unforgiving wilderness areas in the country. He had no proper gear, no food, no way to make fire, and no means of calling for help. The temperature was plummeting, and somewhere in these woods were the bears and mountain lions he had read about in the park's brochures. The first night in the wilderness had taken a severe toll on John Miller's body and spirit. Having spent hours trying to find his way back to the trail before darkness forced him to stop, he had foolishly drained his single water bottle. Now, as the pale morning light filtered through the dense canopy, his throat felt like sandpaper. His lips had already started to crack, and a dull headache pounded behind his eyes, the first signs of dehydration taking hold. The snow had stopped, but the damage was done. The entire landscape looked alien under its white blanket, erasing any familiar landmarks that might have helped him orient himself. John's hands trembled as he brushed the frost off his clothes. His light jacket, stiff with ice, crackled with every movement. The night spent huddled against a tree had left him with violent shivers that he couldn't control. Despite his deteriorating condition, John knew he had to move. The morning sun offered a few precious hours of better visibility, and staying in one place meant certain death. He forced his numb legs to carry him forward, searching desperately for any sign of water. The irony wasn't lost on him. Surrounded by snow, he was dying of thirst, but he knew eating snow would only lower his body temperature further. His movements became increasingly erratic as dehydration clouded his judgment. The terrain grew steeper, but John barely noticed. His focus had narrowed to putting one foot in front of the other. The granola bar he had eaten the previous evening felt like a distant memory as his stomach cramped with hunger. Then came the moment that would seal his fate. As he stumbled through a particularly dense patch of underbrush, the ground suddenly disappeared beneath his feet. John's exhausted mind barely registered what was happening as he pitched forward into empty air. The ravine had been hidden by a deceptive overhang of snow, and now he was falling. The world spun in a blur of white and brown. His body slammed against the steep incline, picking up speed. Rocks and branches tore at his clothes and skin. John's desperate attempts to grab onto something, anything, only resulted in shredding his fingertips. The sickening crunch when his ankle struck. A protruding boulder echoed through the valley, followed by his agonized scream. When he finally came to rest at the bottom of the ravine, the pain was overwhelming. His ankle had twisted at an impossible angle, and even the slightest movement sent waves of agony through his entire leg. The phone in his pocket, though dead, had been his last lifeline to potential rescue. Now it lay scattered in pieces around him, shattered beyond any hope of repair. Blood from numerous cuts stained the snow around him pink. His jacket, already inadequate against the cold, had been torn to shreds during the fall. As shock set in, a strange warmth spread through his body, a deceptive comfort that John recognized as a dangerous sign of hypothermia from his basic first aid training. The ravine walls rose steep and unforgiving on all sides. Even if his ankle hadn't been broken, climbing out would have been nearly impossible in his weakened state. The realization hit him with crushing force. This wasn't just a bad situation anymore. This was a death trap. The afternoon sun barely reached the bottom of the ravine, and the temperature was dropping rapidly again. John's wet clothes began to freeze, creating an icy shell around his body. His attempts to crawl only resulted in more pain, and each movement drove the broken ends of bone against each other, sending fresh waves of agony through his leg. As the light began to fade, bringing with it the bone-chilling cold of another mountain night, John's thoughts turned to his family, his parents who had warned him about hiking alone, his sister who had offered to come with him but whom he had assured this was just a simple day hike. The park rangers had said that in these temperatures, without proper gear, the human body couldn't survive more than 3 days. John had already used up one of those days. The sound of a distant howl echoing through the gathering darkness sent a new spike of fear through his exhausted body. He wasn't alone in these woods, and in his current state, he was nothing more than easy prey. The local wolves would have no trouble picking up the scent of his blood on the wind. The second night descended like a heavy curtain over the ravine, bringing with it a bone-chilling silence that seemed to consume everything. John's world had shrunk to the small hollow at the base of the ravine, where he lay shivering uncontrollably. His broken ankle had swollen to twice its normal size. the pain now a constant companion that kept him from finding even a moment of rest. The temperature continued its merciless drop as darkness deepened. John's damp clothes had frozen solid, crackling with every shallow breath he took. His fingers and toes had long since lost all feeling, and an insidious numbness was slowly creeping up his limbs. The violent shivering that had racked his body for hours began to subside, a development he knew was not a good sign. His survival training, limited as it was, had taught him that when the shivering stops, hypothermia has taken a dangerous turn. Strange lights danced at the edges of his vision, a kaleidoscope of colors that his rational mind knew couldn't be real. The dehydration and cold were playing tricks on him. Time became fluid, stretching and contracting unpredictably. Sometimes minutes felt like hours, while entire hours slipped by in what seemed like seconds. As moonlight filtered through the clouds, it cast ghostly shadows across the snow. That's when John noticed them. Tracks in the fresh snow, not 20 feet from where he lay. The distinct round prints with no claw marks told him exactly what had passed by while he had drifted in and out of consciousness. Mountain lion. The realization should have terrified him, but he was too far gone to muster more than a dull acknowledgement of the danger. The big cat had circled his position, probably attracted by the scent of blood from his numerous cuts. The tracks told a clear story. The predator had been watching, waiting, likely sensing his weakening condition. It was the way of nature, he thought distantly. The strong survived by preying on the weak. Right now, there was nothing weaker in these mountains than John Miller, his. Thoughts began to wander, floating away like leaves on a gentle stream. He remembered his mother's voice, warning him about the dangers of solo hiking. The memory of his warm apartment in Minneapolis felt like a dream from another lifetime. Had it really been only 2 days since he had parked his car at the visitor center? It seemed impossible that life could change so dramatically in such a short time. The cold no longer bothered him as much, replaced by a dangerous sense of comfort. Some part of his mind recognized this as the final stage of hypothermia, when the body gives up its fight against the cold and accepts the freezing temperature as normal. That same part knew he should be terrified, should be fighting against the overwhelming urge to sleep that was pulling at him. But he was so tired, so very tired. Clouds drifted across the moon, plunging the ravine into complete darkness. The sound of his heartbeat grew fainter in his ears, a slowly fading drum that had kept time for 32 years, but was now winding down. John found himself thinking about all the things he had left undone, the promotion he had been working towards, the trips he had planned to take, the family he would never start. A strange peace settled over him as he accepted the inevitable. The mountain lion would probably return soon, but it didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except the heavy blanket of sleep that was settling over him. His last coherent thought was a silent apology to his family for the pain his death would cause them. Just as consciousness began to slip away entirely, a sound penetrated the darkness. A heavy crunching in the snow, too heavy to be the mountain lion. Through half-closed eyes, John caught a glimpse of something massive moving at the edge of his field of vision. His dulled mind registered the shape as a form his ancient ancestors had learned to fear. The broad shoulder hump, the dish-shaped face, the massive bulk that could only belong to one creature, a grizzly bear. A distant part of him noted the irony. He had come to Glacier National Park, hoping to see a grizzly from the safety of a marked trail. Now one had found him, but he was too far gone to even feel afraid. As his consciousness finally faded completely, his last sight was of the enormous predator moving closer, its breath creating clouds of vapor in the freezing air. What happened next defied every natural law, every instinct, and everything science tells us about the relationship between humans and grizzly bears. As John's consciousness flickered back, his first sensation was not of teeth or claws, but of movement. His body was being dragged across the snow, the motion sending sharp jolts of pain through his broken ankle. Through the fog of hypothermia, he became aware of something gripping the back of his torn jacket. The powerful presence above him radiated. Heat and a musky, wild scent filled his nostrils. The massive grizzly bear was carefully pulling him across the ravine floor, showing a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature of such enormous strength. When John's body had first registered the bear's presence, His frozen muscles hadn't even been capable of a fear response. Now, as awareness slowly returned, he remained perfectly still, not out of strategy but simple necessity. His body was too far gone to fight or flee. Through half-open eyes, he watched the moonlit snow pass beneath him as the bear continued its purposeful journey. The grizzly stopped periodically, lowering its massive head to inspect him with dark, intelligent eyes. Its hot breath warmed his face during these pauses, and John could see the steam rising from its fur in the freezing air. The bear's behavior was unlike anything recorded in the history of human and grizzly interactions. Instead of seeing him as prey or a threat, the bear seemed to be treating him with an almost maternal concern. After what felt like hours, but could have been minutes, the bear's path led them to an opening in the mountainside. The entrance was partially hidden by fallen trees and snow, but it was clearly a den. Fresh claw marks on the surrounding trees, and the lingering warmth inside suggested the bear had recently been using this space. The bear's massive form blocked most of the moonlight as it carefully maneuvered John into the den. The interior was surprisingly spacious, and most importantly, it was warm. The bear's body heat had created a natural shelter from the killing cold outside. The ground was covered with a thick layer of pine needles and dried grass, forming a natural insulating bed. As John lay there, his body began to register the dramatic change in temperature. The den's warmth started to work against the deep cold that had settled in his bones. The violent shivering returned, a good sign that his body was fighting back against hypothermia. The bear settled next to him, its enormous bulk providing a wall of living heat that gradually began to thaw his frozen clothes and skin. The bear's presence should have terrified him, but in his current state it felt strangely comforting. The great predator's steady breathing created a rhythm that seemed to fill the small space. Each exhale sent warm air washing over him, slowly, bringing feeling back to his extremities. The pain in his ankle returned with renewed intensity as his body temperature rose, but it was a welcome sensation compared to the numbness of near death. As the first light of dawn filtered into the den, John awoke to a sound that made his heart skip. The bear was returning. His mind, now clearer after hours in the relative warmth, braced for the worst. But what happened next would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about bear behavior. The massive grizzly carefully entered the den, and in her powerful jaws was a fresh salmon. The fish was still dripping from the stream where she must have caught it. With movements that seemed impossibly delicate for such a huge creature, she placed the salmon within John's reach. The message was clear, though it defied all logic. She was feeding him. His hands trembling, John reached for the fish. Every survival instinct screamed against taking food from a grizzly bear, but hunger overrode his fear. The salmon meat was rich in the nutrients his depleted body desperately needed. As he ate, the bear watched with what could only be described as satisfaction, her eyes showing an intelligence that went far beyond mere animal instinct. When a bitter wind began howling outside the den, the bear's behavior became even more remarkable. She positioned her massive body at the den's entrance, using herself as a living windbreak. Her thick fur blocked the icy gusts that would have otherwise robbed John of his precious body heat. It was as if she understood exactly what he needed to survive. Later that day, when dehydration began to overwhelm him again, the bear's actions crossed into the realm of the miraculous. She began making soft, grunting sounds, clearly wanting him to follow. John's broken ankle made movement excruciating, but somehow he understood that this was important. Using the den's wall for support, he managed to hop on his good leg. The bear stayed close as he stumbled along, her bulk providing support when he faltered. She led him to a small spring just a short distance from the den. The water was clear and fresh, protected from freezing by its continuous movement. Without her guidance, he would never have found this life-saving water source in his weakened state, but perhaps the most astonishing behavior came that night. The mountain lion that had been stalking John returned, drawn by the scent of wounded prey. The bear's reaction was immediate and fierce. She burst from the den with a roar that shook the ground, charging at the big cat. The mountain lion fled into the darkness, no match for the protective fury of a grizzly bear that had, for some inexplicable reason, chosen to become John's guardian. Through it all, her behavior showed signs of something deeper than mere animal Instinct. The way she checked on him throughout the day, the gentle nudges when he needed to stay awake, the soft vocalizations that seemed almost like communication. It was as if she had adopted him, treating him with the same care she would show a vulnerable cub. Wildlife biologists would later struggle to explain her actions. Some suggested she might have recently lost a cub, and her maternal instincts had redirected toward John. Others proposed that her behavior represented an extraordinary example of cross-species empathy, but none of their theories could fully explain the level of intelligence and care she displayed. As night fell again, the bear settled at the den's entrance, her massive form silhouetted against the starlit sky. She had positioned herself perfectly to watch both John and the world outside, ready to defend against any threat that might approach. Her presence had become a source of comfort rather than fear, a guardian angel in the most unlikely form imaginable. On the morning of the fourth day, something in the bear's behavior changed. She became restless, moving in and out of the den, looking in a specific direction. Her movements had a new purpose, and once again she made those distinct vocalizations that John had learned meant he should follow. The sun had barely cleared the mountain peaks when the bear began her most incredible feat yet. As John struggled to stand on his one good leg, she positioned herself beside him, her massive body becoming a living crutch. The top of her shoulder was at the perfect height for him to lean on, and somehow she understood exactly how to match his stumbling pace. Their progress was slow but deliberate. The bear seemed to know exactly where she was going, choosing paths that were manageable for someone with a broken ankle. When they encountered steep sections, she would wait patiently as John inched his way forward, always staying close enough to prevent him from falling. The intelligence behind her actions was undeniable and unexplainable. Hour after hour they moved through the wilderness, taking breaks when John's strength began to fail. During these rests, the bear would scan their surroundings constantly, her keen senses alert for any danger. She had become not just his guide, but his protector, his support, and his only hope for survival. As the afternoon sun began to warm the air, a sound cut through the mountain silence. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors echoed off the valley. Walls. The bear's ears twitched at the sound, but instead of fleeing from the human noise, she continued guiding John forward. It was as if she understood that these sounds meant his salvation. When they finally reached the edge of a clearing, the helicopter noise grew louder. The bear stopped, her body becoming still. In the distance, John could see search and rescue teams moving through the trees. He wanted to call out, but his throat was too dry to make more than a whisper. Then came the moment that would leave the scientific community stunned for years to come. The bear gently pulled away from supporting John and looked directly into his eyes. There was an intelligence there, an awareness that seemed to transcend the natural order. With one final soft grunt, she turned and melted into the forest, just as the rescue team crested the ridge. The story of John Miller's rescue made headlines worldwide. Wildlife biologists, animal behaviorists, and scientists from every field struggled to explain what had happened. The evidence was undeniable. The den site was found, complete with fish bones and signs of both human and bear occupation. The search team documented the tracks showing how the bear had supported John's weight. Trail cameras from the area captured images of their journey together. Experts who studied the case were forced to re-evaluate everything they thought they knew about bear behavior. The level of empathy, intelligence, and deliberate care the grizzly had shown went far beyond any documented animal behavior. Some scientists suggested this might be evidence of a level of consciousness in bears that humans had never before recognized. John Miller's own body provided proof of the miracle. His survival, given the conditions and his injuries, should have been impossible. The combination of hypothermia, dehydration, and exposure should have been fatal. Yet the bear's den had provided perfect shelter, and her body heat had kept him alive through the coldest nights. In the years that followed, the story would be studied, debated, and discussed in scientific journals and nature documentaries. But for John Miller, the experience went beyond scientific explanation. He had experienced something that defied our understanding of the natural world, a moment when the line between human and animal dissolved, replaced by something far more profound. The grizzly bear never reappeared, though park rangers monitored the area closely. She had simply returned to the wilderness, leaving behind a mystery that would challenge our understanding of the natural world and remind us that perhaps there are some things in nature that science alone cannot explain. If this extraordinary tale of survival and unexpected friendship touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. This is your chance to be part of something amazing. Hit that subscribe button right now and join our community of wildlife enthusiasts who know that nature's greatest mysteries are still waiting to be discovered. Ring that notification bell. Because trust me, you don't want to miss our next incredible story. Want more unbelievable animal encounters? Share this video and help us reach 1 million subscribers. Remember, the wilderness holds secrets that will change everything you thought you knew about the natural world.